Okay, we're very lucky today to have Michael Schaeffer Omer-Man to brief us on Israel's fight for democracy. Before we give him a real introduction, one little bit of housekeeping. Oops, that's that.
Now what?
I want to point out what's coming up in a week. Next month, we have Uri, who will talk about Zionism, its meaning, how the word has evolved, how it's used and misused, and is it relevant in our time. A month after that, in August, another early start at 6 o'clock, because we have an East Coast guest, is Alon Ben-Mir. He's going to be talking about Saudi Arabia as a potential peacemaker. He is an Israeli who teaches at NYU and has been involved in track 2 negotiations for 25 years. The following month, I think we're going to have Shira Klein, who's a professor at Chapman College and is an expert on Judaism in Italy. And she's going to talk about fascism development in Italy in the 1920s and how it relates to Israel today. As always, we're open for suggestions for Zoom guests and topics. And I'd like to remind people that dues would be a nice thing to have, because we give all our guests an honorarium, and it costs us a few $100s to maintain our Zoom contact on our website. With that, I'm going to go back to and stop my share.
How much is the due, Jeff? This is the first time I've heard about it.
I will send you, Gideon, a way to do it.
Okay, thank you.
What I've been doing lately is using ChatGPT to write an introduction. In the previous 2 or 3 things, I've just asked them to give me an introduction to Michael Schaeffer Omer-Man. But today, this time I did something extra. I said, don't forget to talk about 972 and Dawn. So they're now in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this introduction. It'll take me a couple of minutes, word for word what ChatGPT gave us. And then I'll turn it over to Michael, and we'll, of course, invite Michael to improve the introduction. I know there's at least one error in this introduction. Anyway, here it is. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and fellow participants, I extend a warm welcome to all of you as we gather here today for a thought-provoking Zoom session featuring the esteemed journalist and author, Michael Schaeffer Omer-Man. Our focus lies on a topic of immense relevance, Israel's fight for democracy. In this session, we have the privilege of drawing from the profound expertise of Mr. Omer-Man, who has dedicated his career to unearthing the intricacies of Israeli society. As the former editor-in-chief of Plus 972 magazine, the renowned online publication, and as co-founder of Dawn, Democracy in the Arab World Now. Mr. Omer-Man's work has played a pivotal role in amplifying marginalized voices and shedding light on the challenges faced by Israel's democratic framework. Throughout the discourse, we shall embark on a captivating journey through Israel's historical and contemporary struggle to uphold democratic principles. Together with Mr. Omer-Man, we will explore the multifaceted dimensions of this fight, analyzing the delicate balance between security concerns, human rights, and the quest for justice within the Israeli context. As we engage in this conversation, it is our collective responsibility to grasp the complexities that underpin Israel's democratic aspirations. Let us open our minds to new perspectives, examining the potential path forward and reflect upon the significance of democratic values in shaping Israel's future. Without further ado, I invite you all to join us as we embark on an enlightening exploration of Israel's fight for democracy with Michael Schaeffer Omer-Man, the trailblazing journalist whose commitment to truth and justice has paved the way for meaningful change. With that, ChatGPT, I turn it over to Michael. Before that, please, everybody, mute yourself so that we don't have extemporaneous noise. Go ahead, Michael.
Thanks, Jeff, and your AI bots. I think I'll just, leave it to you guys to figure out what's true and what's not. It reminds me of an icebreaker, two truths and a lie, where somebody has to figure out everybody has to figure out what you're telling the truth about and what you're not. I'll give myself a short introduction. As the AI bot mentioned, I was the editor-in-chief of 972 magazine for 7 years. Prior to that, I worked as a journalist at the Jerusalem Post, and following in the years since, I've done some humanitarian work with the Norwegian Refugee Council in their Palestine office, and for the past 2 years, been the director of research for Israel-Palestine at Dawn, which is the democracy and human rights organization founded by Jamal Khashoggi before he was murdered by the Saudis in Istanbul. Can talk about my other work later if anybody's interested, but on this topic, what was the title? Can the protest save Israel's democracy? I didn't object to the title, even though I object to the title because it makes for a more interesting point of departure for this discussion, which I think is Israel democracy? Has it ever been a democracy? What is democracy in Israel? What is the version of democracy that we see there, and what would saving it mean? So that's, I think, where I want to start today. And I think the answer to me is pretty clear, which is that for most Jewish Israelis, their experience of Israel has been democratic, but that doesn't make Israel a democracy. And we can go down the line, starting with Palestinian citizens of Israel and non-Jews, and those people who have lived under military occupation or siege for many, many decades. And a reminder that many of you probably already know, which is that there was somewhere between 6 and 9 months where Israel was not ruling over a Palestinian population undemocratically under military rule. And that was, when the military government within 1948 Israel was ended in 1966, and until the West Bank and Gaza and the rest were occupied in June 67. Meaning that undemocratic rule, military dictatorship, whatever you want to call it, apartheid, settler colonialism, it doesn't matter. The undemocratic experience has been the norm, and the democratic experience is the exception. And it's an interesting one because the exception is so much more front and center and visible to the world, who go through great strains to see that version of Israel and to believe in that version of Israel, that it oftentimes forgets the nature of the rest of the regime. So, I think in short, Israel is not a democracy, but it has many democratic institutions. A lot of people, millions of people, most Jews in Israel experience it as a democracy. And yet they don't, because their democracy rules undemocratically over another people. So what would saving that mean? I don't know. I think, frankly, it would mean going back to the status quo of last year, or 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, or today, for that matter, because nothing really has fundamentally changed since the new Israeli government came into power this year. What we can say is that we do know what the two sides of this equation want. And I'll start with the government. So, the government, there's actually a lot of different interests in why they've advanced this, there's different words as always with Israel for what people call it, whether it's a legal revolution or regime change or systemic, revolution, and none of them really translate that well. But, depending on where you sit, you can kind of tell, by the terms that people use. So the government, it's made up of a bunch of different camps, and I'll do this very, very quickly because I think many of you know a lot of this. There's the Ben-Gvirs and Smotriches, who come from a much more messianic religious Zionist standpoint, ranging from Kahane to Gush Emunim, but basically full control over the land of Israel for the Jews is an ideological commandment, basically. That is the ultimate goal of everything that they do politically. There are the ultra-Orthodox who see the chance to disempower the courts and the liberal characteristics of Israel's system of governance as an opportunity to secure their piece of the pie, and their piece of power. We saw a sort of counter movement against the ultra-Orthodox a couple decades ago, not for the first time, but in this current iteration, culminating around the social justice protests of 2011 and the Yair Lapid's party that came out of it, demanding that everyone in Israeli society carry an equal share of the burden, meaning military service. And more frequently, the call has been about taxes recently, but then you also have to throw in matters of religious coercion. And I've said this to a lot of people since I moved here to DC a year ago, that the most hatred I ever saw in Israel between one group and another was secular versus Orthodox, vehemently secular, staunchly secular, liberal Israelis toward the ultra-Orthodox and what they view as religious coercion, which of course the ultra-Orthodoxy is, cultural, religious autonomy, whatever. But they're looking to preserve that. And I would just add that, in 2011, in the next elections, when Yair Lapid gained a huge following and a large number of Knesset seats, the ultra-Orthodox were out of the government for the first time in decades, whereas they had been willing to sit with anyone before that. So their interest is pretty clear. And then there's the Likud, which, there's a lot of speculation about what is driving the Likud and their advancement of these changes. And some people think it's about Bibi avoiding going to jail, which it is. And some people think it's about the more messianic, parts of the Likud, which are using it the same way as the religious Zionists to advance annexation and basically all of the restraints that the legal system, and for that matter, the democratic system, have put on settlement expansion and permanent Israeli control over the territories. And then there's just the populism side of it, which is that we see this all over the world right now in the past decade, and it's been happening in Israel as well. People have been calling Bibi King Bibi adoringly and not mockingly for many years. And out of this desire, out of this sort of this belief or idea that to survive in the Middle East, you need a strong leader. You need somebody who can keep you alive. And that was Bibi's open campaign promise for many years was, I'm going to keep you guys alive. I've been in power. It hasn't broken. So let's keep going. And with lack of any positive vision for what an alternative could be, as opposed to not Bibi, it's been pretty successful for him. That was until the corruption stuff, and then he lost half of his right-wing colleagues, and we are where we are today. So the government is trying to change the system. The result would be, basically that the right-wing can maintain power forever, that it has the tools to stop anybody else from kicking it out of power. There are a lot of different things people want to do with that, from immediate annexation of the entire West Bank to guaranteeing that ultra-Orthodox men can study without having to work their whole lives, to, Ben Gvir getting to do whatever his sick fantasies drive him to do. The opposition and the protests, there's no one opposition here. Even from the street protests to the politicians, you have a significant and yet not significant anti-occupation, or let's call it the pro-real democracy bloc in the protests, which see and are trying to get others to see the connection between Israeli democracy and the lack of democracy for Palestinians. I see a few of you with signs in the background talking about whether democracy can exist alongside occupation. And we discussed at the beginning that Israel's occupation is a permanent occupation, which is, I think the thing that most people who see what's going on, that's the pivotal point here, is that nobody's trying or even dreaming of changing the situation, of that situation. Certainly not for the better. There's the more mainstream, which is represented by Yair Lapid and Gantz, and the disaffected Likud breakaways, who, I'm not sure that they fully understand what it is that they want. Or let me say that more clearly. I don't think that they're willing to follow their logic all the way through to what it means. And that is going to be the ultimate restraint on what is possible in this movement. And let me explain what that means. I don't think they're capable of defining what Israeli democracy actually looks like while it continues to rule undemocratically over millions of Palestinians without granting them democratic rights. I don't think that they're able to articulate how you create a constitution that guarantees equality while maintaining a system of inequality and apartheid. And for those reasons, I don't think they're ever going to be able to push back the undemocratic tide that is pushing Israel in one direction, because they're trying to move it back to the status quo ante of last year, and not to a better future where there's actual democracy, where there actually is equality for Israeli citizens, for Israeli subjects, for whoever it is that's living under Israeli control. So, I think that, let me just tell one more anecdote and then I'll move on, which is that, in the beginning of all this, I was probably like many of you watching the Israeli news nonstop. And there would be all these, sort of, man on the street interviews with protesters. And the one that just had me laughing for days and days and days was they were showing these, 3 elementary school age girls who were not chanting, but singing a version of a Passover song, but saying, my country has 3 branches. But it doesn't. There is this illusion that there's this great teaching moment, that there's opportunity to teach Israelis what real democracy is, and to create an appreciation for civic, responsibility and citizenship and civic engagement. But it's the starting point refused to lift the mask completely. Israel never had 3 independent branches, even in its best days, when the judiciary declared itself to be a check on the power of the executive and parliament. And this is the right's grievance, the right wing's grievance today. They kind of just created it for themselves. There is no Israeli constitution that gives a judiciary a check on power. And the parliament is not a check on the executive's power, because the executive is within the parliament, and in order to rule, you have to have a majority, which means that there's never a case of a split government like you have in the US. So the idea that a parliament controlled by the government can be a check on the government is a little bit silly. And it worked as long as it worked. And I think that's the issue that we're seeing, is that there's been a decision since day one of Israel's statehood and the design of its governance and its actual governance to not deal with deeper issues. The Knesset was not actually the Knesset in the beginning. It was supposed to be a constitutional convention, basically. There was supposed to be a constitution within a year, and it just never happened because they chose to never make it happen, because it was a little too hard, because there was the Orthodox issue, because there was the Palestinian issue, because there was, all these issues. It's just always been easier to not decide. And that has made it easy for Israeli leaders to sort of creep in one direction and to create temporary situations permanent. And that's where we are today. So just touch on two more points. One is the US response, because that's what I'm working on these days. And I believe Jeff sent out a brief that we gave to the White House at the beginning of the year, in December, when it was clear that this government was coming into power, and that Ben-Gvir was not going to be relegated to the backbenches like he was in the previous time around. I said to my partner, Don, who works on Israel-Palestine with me, like, the administration, no US administration has any clue what to do, because they cannot see Israel in any light other than a positive light. They're unwilling to confront it. This administration in particular has zero interest in doing anything that could create friction with Israel. And so we started to see this very strange, nuanced language that probably me and two diplomats in Europe somewhere noticed, which is everybody knows that they started to say that the relationship was based on democratic values, which is, what's missing is the continuation of the sentence, but it's insinuated, which is that without the democratic values, without the democratic institutions, that the relationship is missing one of its bedrock components. The other thing that they started to say, and this one to me was an invitation to build on, which is where we started writing our paper from, was that they stopped using the word unshakable or unbreakable in relation to the relationship writ large, and connected it very specifically and limitedly to the US commitment to Israel's security. I said, okay, there's an opening here. And so we tried to give them a roadmap for how to change the relationship, how to show the Israeli government, understanding that they're not going to end the relationship. And that's my position, that's Don's position, my organization's position, that the US simply should not be supporting Israel, not militarily, not diplomatically, not financially. But we understand that that's not happening. We tried to give the administration something that we thought they could do, which is to start to change the relationship so that it reflects that one party has changed. And I described this not in the paper itself, but every time I've spoken about it, as the US needs to sort of take the approach of the parent of an addict. You love this, we understand that there's this deep love, an unbreakable love, but you also have to understand that the person you're loving has changed, and therefore you have to change your side of the relationship in order to make it more suitable for you. You might not cut them off completely, but you have to change it. You have to start treating them differently, not a juvenile delinquent, but an adult delinquent. So that meant not responding piecemeal to each thing that Israel does, like a settlement announcement or even acts of violence. To not react to each development as if it's meant to reverse that specific development, but rather to set benchmarks for Israeli actions, ranging from handing over more power to Smotrich over settlement planning, which we saw happen this week, to to actual declared de jure annexation, and a million other things, including aspects of the judicial overhaul. And to say, like, you just have to communicate. If you do this, the consequence will be that we no longer defend you at this place, or we will stop automatically approving. We're going to de-exceptionalize the defense package so that there's oversight over it in ways that other countries experience. To start treating Israel more like Saudi Arabia and Hungary, which is not a great record, but it's different than Israel, as a way of signaling that things cannot be the same, because we know that the United States is not going to do anything, right? People keep asking me all the time, what can the U.S. do? And I said that's the wrong question. It's what is it willing to do? Because we're all working to change what it's willing to do. We know what it can do. We've seen that, for better or for worse, from Ukraine to Iraq to I'm trying to think of some good examples. Can't. And unfortunately, they were interested in hearing all these things. I think they really were flabbergasted about what to do, but I think they've sort of regressed to the mean from that shock to a place where they just do the normal thing, which is put out a statement when things don't go their way, and send a strong message privately when they're really upset with something, but ultimately not doing anything that actually has an effect. And again, not by invading, not by actually holding anybody responsible for something, but simply by distancing itself. That's what I believe the U.S. could do, do within the realm of what it's willing to do, but that's not happening. And then the last question is, where are the Palestinians in all this? And I'm not going to speak on behalf of Palestinians here, but I would just like to point out that there are very few Palestinians who see a role for themselves, citizens of Israel who see a role for themselves within the protest, partly because Israeli Jews have never stood up for them, partly because they don't see the system as ever having really defended their rights in the way that Israeli Jews are afraid of losing. And I think partly because of the symbolism that it's become such a Israeli flag dominated movement that it seems almost silly to expect Palestinians to show up there. And beyond citizens of Israel, I think it's far more clear that the difference between a Lapid government and a Netanyahu government is not one that's going to make anybody come out in the streets and to demand the preservation of democracy for Jews in the West Bank or Gaza or anywhere for that matter. So that's where things are. That's my assessment of why it's so difficult to imagine a positive development coming out of this. That said, all of not all, but my activist friends back in Israel who do see opportunity, and a friend of mine said to me the other day, I'm not optimistic, but I see hope. There's a ray of hope, and it's true. There is an opening. It's a very, very long shot opening, and at best, I think the camp can be expanded and more people can be brought to see that, as Uri Sign says, there's no such thing as democracy with occupation. But even there, what they're willing to do about that is an entirely different question, right? The practice of giving up privilege is very, very different than being a counterweight to a right-wing protester. in a situation where you both have the same privilege. Maybe even you have a little bit less than the right-wing protester. But actually going out and following all the way through what it would mean to be a true democracy, within a two-state framework, within a one-state framework, within any framework. I don't see Israelis coming to that. Certainly a critical mass of Israeli Jews. And the main reason there is exactly what I just said, because it would require such a fundamental rethinking of what Zionism means and what self-determination means for Jewish peoplehood if it weren't in an exclusive supremacist, politically supremacist, racial, whatever, state or apartheid regime or whatever we're calling it. And the framing of more democratic or less democratic sort of sidesteps that entire question and makes it something that is simply not going to be dealt with. One last point, and then I'm happy to hear questions or address any other angles that I've left behind, that I've skipped over, is what are the government's chances of success? And I don't think they're actually extremely high either. They could if they wanted to, but they're gonna get a few concessions and then go the way of every single Israeli government, which is start to fight amongst themselves, and some reorganization will take place. But they will get some aspects of this. It's very much inside baseball to try and suss out which they'll be. But Israel will be worse off. The right will have a stronger hold on power. Palestinians will have fewer, well, not fewer rights, but the people who are discriminated against will have fewer access to recourse, to justice, to fighting back against individual injustices. The system is certainly not capable of looking at the collective or national injustices. But I think the opportunity here is not in getting Israelis to change and have a revolution for democracy for all, but getting the world to understand that even if things don't get a whole lot worse, they already are. Things already are where the nightmare scenario is, meaning there already is a dictatorship called Israel. It's just that Jewish Israelis in Tel Aviv don't experience it. And there already is an apartheid regime. There already is, so many of the things that liberal Israelis are out there demonstrating for do not exist in a systemic across the board way for everybody living under Israeli control. And that is not a democracy. And I hope that a result of this is that more people outside of Israel start to understand that, and eventually to act accordingly. So that's what I have to say. Happy to take questions, or as I said, to talk about. Yes, sorry.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. If you have a question, please use the reflection button on the bottom of your screen to raise your hand, as I did. And just to start it off, I'll ask a quick question. You say what the United States should do is distance itself from Israel. What does that look like?
I think, there's two parts to that answer. One is what the Biden administration can do, and what I would like the U.S. government to do, without the restraints of domestic politics and every senior U.S. politician having at least a declared close relationship with Israel. So I think what the Biden administration can do, there's a bunch of smaller steps. It's not vetoing UN Security Council resolutions. It's not pressuring other states to drop criticism of Israel. It's not defending it everywhere. There are technical things, like the US is very, very permissive in allowing Israel to resell American technology as part of its own weapons exports without the proper licenses. It could start to enforce those. It could start to enforce human rights law and, sanctions on Israeli officials who, are quite clearly, as, my organization has demonstrated several times in the past year, in violation of the sanctions legislation and orders. It can, I think there's a link in the invitation. So my apologies for not having it. It's been almost a year since we wrote this thing. But there's lots of steps that the US could take to basically to say the relationship is no longer special. We have a relationship. We're not going to just end it because, that's not in our interests. And, honestly, it's probably not. But it doesn't have to be the special relationship that it has been, as distinguished from so many others, particularly, non-allied countries. What it could do if it didn't have all those restraints. And sorry, just to back up, I don't think that any of those things would change Israeli behavior. And I don't think that they would fundamentally alter the course of the US-Israel relationship, but they would indicate that this is not okay. And that is an important starting point, because we haven't even had that. And in the long term, I think the US should not be giving F-35s to an undemocratic regime, be it Saudi Arabia or Israel. And that kind of distancing is much more appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Uri.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So first of all, thank you very much for the presentation. You did a great job. Covered a lot of points. I just want to add a few things to your ammunition. First of all, the United States never pretended to be a moral state or country, as far as I can tell. I mean, they talk about it, but they're not. And if you need any proofs, ask Kissinger about it. So he'll tell you how moralistic the United States is and has been. So obviously, if we can tolerate Saudi Arabia, Israel is much better than Saudi Arabia on almost every level. And another element to the equation that most people tend to actually ignore. Israel is the biggest cell representative of the military-industrial complex of the United States, bar none. The $38 billion that Israel gets over 10 years, it's a small portion of what they should be getting if they were a real salesperson. So the whole talk about moralistic and values and all that, this is a nice conversation, but it's meaningless. It's meaningless because think about it. Is there any war the United States didn't like in the last 75 years? We've been involved in so many other wars as Americans. So do we have the moral position to say anything to Israel about suppressing some people? Big deal, huh? You did it, we're doing. So in other words, when you use the moralistic approach, the United States doesn't stand well, and it definitely doesn't have the position to tell more, to preach morale to Israel. Now, that doesn't mean that Israel is a moralistic place. It means that basically Israel tells them, hey, don't, it's the saying about the stove calling the kettle black. Now, as far as one of the things that you mentioned, I think the United States can do it in 2 seconds. The moment they don't put a veto, automatic veto in the United States Security Council on any resolution against Israel, Israel is going to collapse politically, and it's going to collapse as far as public relations in the world. Another element, and this is really the conversation I've been having with all my Israeli friends who ask me, what's going to happen to Israel? Is Israel going to survive? Here's my basic approach to that. Israel will survive. You know how? Because Ben Gurion and Peres made sure it is. We have bombs, more than one, maybe 200. Nobody plays games with people who have a credit. We did Masada. You don't play roulette with people who are crazy enough to blow the whole world. So the survival of the state of Israel has been established a long time ago. The conversation is, what kind of Israel are we going to have? My prediction, it's going towards what we have in Iran. It's going to be a Jewish Iran. That's kind of like my approach to the whole thing. I applaud you, applaud a lot of things, and sometimes I wonder about my sanity trying to fight for the Israeli democracy. Like you said correctly, Israel never been a democracy from the beginning because it never bothered to define its borders. Israel never said it's the state of all its citizens. It's always had the privileged status for Jews. And even that a conversation, because not all Jews are equal in Israel even. There are certain people who are Jews but are not Jews. So all of this thing is just to support what you've been saying. And I applaud you for you're basically doing a whole lot better job than I've been doing, explaining and trying to fight for the explanation of the state of Israel or its governments. But essentially, I'm basically kind of like, I raised my hand a long time ago. The fact that I'm still in the fight, I cannot explain it logically. So thank you again, Michael. Thanks for the listening.
Thank you. And I just add, I'm not an optimistic person about this. It was a very strange experience writing a practical policy memo for what the United States could do. Because, on the one hand, any movement is monumental in this. And at the same time, we're asking for the smallest of things that, it actually is fairly meaningless and, doesn't change the course. But yeah, whether Iran is the right parallel or not, I'm not sure, but it's not headed in a good direction.
Tony.
Yes, Michael, just to shift the focus a little bit on the other side of the apartheid line, I noticed that the, excuse me, over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners who are held without charges so far are thinking of going on a massive hunger strike. Do you think that this will bring any attention to human rights movements across the world and maybe even in the United States to at least try and maybe pry open the door on the, I would have to say, illegal imprisonment of those people?
No.
Okay.
I'll say more. A couple months ago, I had my first success almost ever. My second success ever, but my first success in vis-a-vis the US in doing anything on Israel. Before I get there, I'd just like to clarify that I don't believe there's an apartheid line. I think there's one regime between the river and the sea, and that it has different faces for different populations is exactly what makes it an apartheid regime. There was a Palestinian American man, 76 years old, named Jamal Nisser, who was in administrative detention for the past year, and before that for a previous 4 months. And when I first saw this case, and it's the kind of thing that I do work on, I was like, there's got to be something else here. Like, why? Surely somebody else would have taken this up. And I kept saying that no other organization was taking it up, and so we decided to take it up ourselves. And we brought it to State Department, and we got meetings, and people when it's an American citizen, they're more willing to listen. They're more willing to talk, and they're even more willing to act. I won't go into great detail, but this guy is out, and we played a role in that, and we got the U.S. government to tell the Israelis, like, not okay, no, like, charge him or let him go. And we were really, really hoping, and the plan was to use this case as a way to talk about the issue more generally, because administrative detention is the so antithetical to like the idea of a democratic value, even one democratic value. It's indefinite imprisonment without charge, without trial, with secret evidence that and I've done a lot of research on this over the years, and I've seen all the secret court documents, and the lawyers and the judges, they don't even see any evidence. It's just all this guy is dangerous. Or sometimes it's not even that he's dangerous, it's that we don't have enough evidence to charge him or her. Everybody gets outraged about it. They already are. Whenever it comes up, you'll hear the State Department and the White House saying, we don't like this, and we encourage the Israelis to whatever they encourage them to do. The Europeans do the same. But it's not the issue. It's not the issue that's gonna make anybody go out on a limb or make any more serious demands or stake out a position that could create conflict. It's just something that people don't like. That said, and we saw this, and this is, I think, maybe the point that I haven't said, which is that the second they start doing it on non-settler youth Israeli Jews, more generally, they'll start to care. Then the US will start to care. Then the Europeans will start to care. Then even Israel's new Arab friends will start to care more, which is insane. But it's just one piece of it, and you can't address one piece and ignore the rest of it. It's how can you climb up the hill of administrative detention but leave Gaza? How can you talk about administrative detention, but it's okay that there's different criminal systems for Israelis and Palestinians more generally? So hunger strikes by administrative detainees have been very effective at achieving individual demands. They've gotten a lot of attention. They generally don't accomplish a whole lot from a movement perspective, from a liberation perspective. You're muted, Jeff. Jeff, you're muted.
So while he's muted, let me ask my question, Mike. So I'm, unlike many people here, I'm optimist. The changes will happen.
Change will happen.
Change will happen, and one of the reasons I'm more optimist is there is changes in the American society. We see the first Palestinian American in the Congress. She's getting a following a lot more than I even expected when the first time I sent her a donation. So, and I think there is a younger generation that I don't know if they believe the Palestinian or something, but I have the feeling people are just getting tired of dealing with Israel. I talked to a few people and said, "Oh, this area of the world is hopeless. I don't know why we keep spending a good money there." Yes, if those people, when they said those people, they don't mean only Israelis. They mean the people in this area. If they don't care about, making peace, and then why should we care? Why should we give them money? Why should we give Egypt money? Why America, US give money to many countries there. The Israel get the most, but they are not the only one. Yes, I think Egypt is second there. So that make me optimist. Yes, that people will say, okay, we invested in you enough, and the tide is changing. I mean, I can see it just from talking, from reading. The squad, Bernie Sanders, even, it's small step, but it will accelerate. Yes. So do you see those kind of change coming in our lifetime? Let's say this, my lifetime. I think I'm older than you. So.
I wasn't going to ask. Let's not talk about it in lifetimes. I think the change will only happen generationally. I don't know how long that is. I don't know if it's one generation or two. There definitely is movement, and yes, Israel will survive, but in what form and what consequences that brings about, or what relationships that leads to. Those are the things that we're going to watch. And then there's the biggest point of optimism that I have, which is that some of the biggest changes in the world happened without any warning, at least, to most people who thought they understand how things work.
Yeah.
So, I hope that we're all surprised tomorrow or next year or the year after that. It's not soon enough. And I think we're all working to try and make it happen sooner. But as I alluded to before, the change can also happen in the other direction. And, May 2021 scared the crap out of me, not because it was unexpected in any way, but because it was one of these things that I always imagined happening in the future. But things that are going to happen in the future at some point happen in the present. So I'm an optimist and I'm a pessimist. Mostly I don't make predictions. Jeff is still muted, so Ellie, you've had your hand
Ella,
up.
you've got a question.
Okay.
You're up.
Thank you. Actually, I'd like to piggyback, maybe perhaps not that nicely on what Ori and Gideon was saying. And I'd like to echo Ori in saying that, we do engage in a fiction when we believe that the label of democracy assigned to any one country gives that country an automatic elevated moral status. Because after all, we know countries, most notoriously the United States, does oppress and repress like there is no tomorrow. So we know this. Now, given all of that, my question to you is following on what Gideon was saying. I'm kind of optimistic. I'm kind of optimistic too. So sliding the label of democracy aside for now, what is the one thing that young people can do to make the state of Israel a little less repressive as we patiently just kind of, whittle away at it with all kinds of pressures?
Young people where?
I'll let you, United States, Israel, Palestine, and more broadly, globally.
I mean, in short, seize power. But I think, I understand everything that you guys are saying, and I agree with it. What I don't agree with is that anybody cares about being called a hypocrite. I think it's our responsibility to actually build up these values in US foreign policy. And a lot of people got a lot of false hope from Biden in the beginning because of that. He very clearly stated that he was centering human rights in his foreign policy, and he, made Saudi Arabia a pariah state for 3.5 minutes. And that was impressive for 3.5 minutes. I don't know. I think it's kind of the same thing that we saw that we see with climate change, which is just to make clear that this is not our agenda. We will not stand for this. And, you know, excuse my language, but like to say to the generation in power, you're fucking things up for the future. Do better. And we're watching, and we're going to be a part of it, and we're voting. And, you know, I don't think any US politician, well, I don't think the US political system will ever be shaped by Israel. You know, as much as Israeli policy toward Israel is shaped by Israeli supporters. But, you know, these things can be shaped. Like there are people like myself and far smarter who are trying to figure out how to change US foreign policy. And, you know, it's a matter of just doing the work. You know, there's this old quote about DC, and sorry for the DC quotes now that I live here, but you know, how do you create change? Is you put a bunch of young people in a room and you let them try and figure out a solution until they get tired, and then you throw them out and you get even younger people.
So Mike, if you're pessimist, why you continue to work on it?
I'm a haunted pessimist.
He's a closeted optimist.
No, I am an
Can't
optimist,
hear anything, but it looks like they're speaking.
but
right?
my optimism is
Yeah.
based entirely on the
I've brought it up. Keep going. No,
on the
it's
unexpected.
next.
Michael?
You know, yes.
Yes, thank you for this evening's conversation. You mentioned you were with Norwegian refugee work. Did you do anything with Mads Gilbert regarding Gaza?
No.
Okay, I'm just wondering, because I've been in Gaza 6 times, and I'm wondering where all this is. You got to say about what's the situation, if any, that can possibly change for the prison of Gaza. It doesn't sound encouraging at all for the West Bank Palestinians. In Gaza, even worse, and it seemed to be a forgotten place. And for me and many who've been there, it's not forgotten. I'm just wondering, and the reason I brought it up is because I thought you might have been involved with Mads Gilbert, the Norwegian doctor who did go to Gaza a number of times in the hospitals there to work during the bombings. Have you any comments about Gaza, about any possibility of change, or are they gone, dead, and forgotten?
Forgotten is a good, one of the most accurate words I could use.
It's sad.
It's very sad. Israel has done a very good job of exactly what Ariel Sharon set out to do, which is to create separation between the two.
Yeah.
And the world no longer sees it as part of the same question. You know, the Palestinians are not helping, but they didn't create the situation.
Yeah.
And Israel, you know, is pretty content to treat it as this, you know, whatever you want to call it, forgotten penal colony, or, you know, torture chamber, or whatever, you know, it's, it's very, very sad. And, you know, it's far worse than the occasional bombings is the just abject poverty and lack of opportunity and hope and any opportunity. I unfortunately, I don't have anything even witty to say about Gaza.
Yossi.
Yeah. Hi, Michael. I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was started at 6 p.m., so I didn't hear your presentation, but from the discussion, I can imagine what have been discussed, more or less. But I know there was some part of the discussion about the fact that what can be done. Now, I remember very well at the first Intifada, which was relatively non-violent, at least from the Palestinian side. And the effect on the Israeli society was pretty strong. I remember there was big demonstrations in then was called the King of Israel Square, later Rabin Square, and came big number and told Rabin stop break the bones, because if you remember, he gave the order as the defense minister. But anyway, the impact is that Rabin changed his direction completely and recognized the PLO, and Oslo started. So it was now.
Yes.
I'm not advising anybody, but somebody mentioned hunger strikes. I don't think hunger strike make no impact on Israel or on the White House or anybody too much. But mass demonstration, let's say in West Bank, where hundreds of thousands marching, can make impact. I don't know what's going on in the Palestinian movement and organizations. I know there is a lot of discontent from the Palestinian people against the Palestinian Authority. They lost a lot of trust in them, or they're being very cynical about them. So I don't know, Andis. The only thing I remember that during the first Intifada, which was massive, it did good impact, at least a good impact on the Israeli public opinion, that show a lot of sympathy, at least part of the Israeli public that ever before. I don't know if it can repeat again or not, but not too many options available on the table for the Palestinians. People saying, if Israel survive, I'm not worried about Israel. It's powerful enough economically, militarily to survive. The question if the Palestinians will survive. Because I'm hearing voices from Smotrich and these that we can make their life so miserable that they'll decide to leave. Or Dayan, in the beginning of the occupation, said, you're gonna live like a dogs, and those who don't like it, free to leave. This Dayan quotes, you know.
Yeah.
But apparently they did not leave. Some left, you know, people do migrate from the occupied territory, from Gaza, but still most people are there and continue to live. Now, I have one question for you about the issue of human rights. I mean, there are a relatively large community of human rights in the United States. There are some decent Congress people who sincerely believe in human rights. I'm not talking about the opportunist politicians that for them human rights is just a lip service. But there are, you know, I believe in the progressive caucus of Democratic Party, a lot of good, decent people. But still, I'm not even talking about the issue of Israel-Palestinians. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia or other dictators in the Arab world like Qatar, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, or even what the Turkish government did to the Kurds. If you remember during Trump, the ethnic cleansed 200,000 of them from northern Syria. And it was not too much outcry. This is what in the US. So I don't know how much you have connection to the human rights community organization in the US, but how they deal with all this? I mean, it's so bluntly what's happening. So blunt. How much, or you know, if you have any maybe knowing some people that how they deal with it when it's keep happening again and again, and as I said, not only the Israeli Palestinians, also in the part of the Arab world.
I mean, first off, I work for an organization that works on exactly all of these issues in exactly those countries. We have more or less the same demands for US foreign policy vis-a-vis Israel, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the Emirates, and a few others, with the main common denominator there being these are undemocratic regimes that receive almost unconditional support from the US.
Right.
And that the US should not be giving that kind of military, diplomatic, and economic support to undemocratic countries. And, you know, there's a fantastical element to it because, you know, we all know the world that we live in, and we know that that there are other interests that keep all these things going, whether it's, you know, oil or weapons sales or, you know, just, nepotism and personal relationships between people who don't like the idea of giving up power. Don's position, my organization's position, is that the best thing the US can do is to take its fist off the scale. That if you want to give democracy any chance of developing in any of these countries, that the best thing the US can do is to stop empowering, arming, and giving complete backing to the powers that are working to prevent democracy. And the same is true with Israel. The same is true with Saudi Arabia. That doesn't mean that that's the answer, but I think that that is a direction to push in, and that's, your question made me think of, and I quote this fairly often, so maybe I even said it the last time I spoke with this group, but in my most despondent days at 972 magazine, when we were just covering the same horrible things day after day, and everything just seemed so cyclical, and really any sane person would ask why we keep doing this. And my colleague Hagai Matar would say to me, like, we're pushing in the right direction, and somewhere out there's a tipping point. And it's not so much that we're waiting to get to the tipping point, it's that we need to make sure that there's some sort of infrastructure waiting on the other side. We can't know when change is coming, and we can't know how it's going to happen. I hope it happens much quicker and with much less bloodshed and suffering than I imagine and predict it will. But even if it's that ugly, there needs to be people who've been doing the work to build the institutions of values, of politics, of what foreign policy should look like, of what a constitution should entail, of what coexistence can look like, of what democracy can be, of even how you prevent civil war from breaking out in a transition. It's there is no magic pill. Certainly not when we're up against all the forces that we're up against. But it's it doesn't mean that the work doesn't have value, even if it's not tangible, and even if it's maybe not within our lifetime. So that's not my optimistic note to end on, but it is the thing that I lean on for the drive to keep doing what we do.
Actually, another reason you work is to satisfy yourself that you feel a need to do it. You talk about Biden's administration being highly supportive of Israel, and the previous administration, Trump's, was also highly supportive of Israel. Can you compare how these two different administrations acted, and how Israel reacts or doesn't react to this, and whether there's actually a difference between the Biden and the Trump?
I think we can look at each side independently. I'm not sure that, I think there are too many variables to compare the relationships directly. The thing that's unique about the Biden administration, and not just compared to the Trump administration, but every previous administration going back to, I guess, Clinton, is that he's not trying to do anything. The Biden administration's approach to Israel is zero conflict. He was around during the Obama negotiations. He saw, what Trump was able to accomplish by throwing out the rule book, and said, I don't want no part of it. They have the most dangerous position, which is to, and this is one of the most depressing things that I found in the humanitarian world, which is, sort of maintaining a status quo, which, sounds fine if you're here in DC, and maybe even sounds fine if you're in West Jerusalem. But what it means for millions of Palestinians is doing, ensuring that another generation grows up under occupation and apartheid. Now, I also respect why Biden did that, because there are no partners to do anything with. And unless the US is willing to use its full force and to really throw out the rule book, not just, be willing to, do things unconventionally and earnestly or disingenuously, erratically, as the Trump administration's approach was. But to really, as the Israelis say, break the plates and say like, no more is no more is no more, then what business does he have, spending diplomatic and political capital on this issue, which has all downside for a US president that has any other priority in the world or domestically. So, that's the biggest difference between Trump and Biden, but it's between Biden and everybody else, to be a little more frank. That said, Biden does have this idea that human rights are playing a role in guiding his foreign policy. And I think that's made them disengage even further from Israel, because if they were to engage any more, even on the issues that they think are safe, they would have to confront these things, which would create a clash in values and policies and whatever, and it would create conflict, and their policy is zero conflict. So, and then the third part of your question, which I'm not sure you actually said, is, what is the Israeli hope for a second Trump term in their fantasies, or Trump's, or whoever's? Let's just call it a fantasy for now. I'm not sure. I think Trump scared the Israelis a little bit. There's something comforting in knowing the limits of a relationship. Going back to the parent and child relationship, you know how far you can push your parents. And you know that they're the ones that you can push that far, and not some random, other person. And I think the first time that Trump caught Netanyahu or Israel off guard, that there was a real like, oh, okay. And not only that, but he also spoke in a million voices. I don't think it's that consequential, is the bottom line. The US relationship with Israel is the US relationship with Israel. And until further notice, it doesn't really matter who's in the White House. I mean, DeSantis would be horrible, right? It'd get a lot worse, but not unrecognizably. It'd be, more or less the same, without the occasional State Department condemnation.
Okay, thank you. I actually, David Mandel and Judy Levitt and Asim, do any of you have anything to add? Because
No, not me. I can't talk anyway.
Asim, you better unmute yourself.
I am personally very optimistic. I mean, I look at it in terms of hundreds of years, not decades. I think eventually, I can remember in history, I mean, the time when the Nazis thought they had a 1,000-year Reich, and they were really looked like they were super powerful, and many peoples, including Jewish people, were losing their homes. And things have changed. So we have the same situation now in Palestine, Israel, and it will change.
I agree.
David, we see you. Do you have?
Yeah, thanks. Oh, I didn't comb my hair today. Look at that. Trying to think of something to ask. I guess, thank you very much, Michael. I'm glad to hear what you have to say. It does seem pretty pessimistic, but looking for grains of optimism, I guess I wonder, and I asked this of Haggai when he was here recently also, is there some chance that the experience of engaging in this militant protest against the loss of so-called democracy, the threat to so-called democracy, is bringing so many thousands or even hundreds of thousands into the streets? Do you perceive any effect that that's having on those people of opening their eyes to some of the wider issues of apartheid? He seemed Haggai seemed to think that there was, and I'm not there, so I can't say it. I was slightly optimistic to hear that from him, though also skeptical. I just wonder what do you think about that?
I hear it from him. I hear it from others as well. Yes, absolutely, but not at a scale that changes anything in the short term, at least. It plants a seed, and maybe that seed sprouts and turns into something, or maybe it gets stomped on. But it's planting a seed with a significant number of people, not significant enough that it changes any political equation. But it's, as I said earlier, it's an opening, and openings should be seized upon. Cracks and walls, whatever you want to call them. When you see them, you gotta attack them.
That's where the light gets in, as has been said, Leonard Cohen. Also, I've heard that there is an attempt now to create a new political party. Avram Burg is involved in it, some others. I don't remember the other names, but a truly Palestinian Jewish partnership party. My assumption is that it's not going to gain a whole lot of traction in the short term. But do you see any hope in that direction?
Maybe. There's not a great track record by anybody of trying to make these things work. There were attempts over the past decade to try and get Meretz and Hadash to join forces in various ways, even just on paper, and nobody's willing to do it. Nobody's willing to give up power, not the institutions and not the people. And even I'm an Ode stepping down to make way for a different generation or different ideas, not generation, because the person replacing him is probably going to be older, but for different ideas to come forth. And yet, call me when it happens.
Tony.
Yeah, I have one last question, and I forgot about it totally until you mentioned the difference between the Trump administration and the Biden administration. But have you seen the analysis that came out that showed that contributions came through one of Netanyahu's trusted accomplices into the Trump campaign, and that Trump's pullout from the Iranian nuclear deal and Trump's movement of the embassy to Jerusalem were both requests that Netanyahu had strongly urged upon Trump publicly, and he went ahead and he did it. So I wonder if there might still be a little bit of fear about the whole thing, but there might also be a sense of control that they have over him as well.
Maybe. I think the Trump relationship with Israel had so much more to, let me answer that with a little story, which is that one of the things that Don does is we try and go after lobbyists who represent the regimes in the countries that we think the US should not be supporting, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the Emirates, with the idea that, dictator money should not be influencing US foreign policy toward dictators, or worse, even shaping it, and we all know about all the Gulf money and, the think tanks in DC and all the myriad ways that they've developed, from buying up golf leagues to white shoe lobbyists. When we started the Israel program, we understood that we needed an entirely different approach because people don't represent Israel for money. They do it for ideology. They do it for belief. They do it for not money reasons. So while there might be corruption there, I don't think it's what shaped his policy. And even if it did, if it wasn't that, it would have been something else. Yeah, that's my answer. Is that, you know, underneath it all, under the style, the relationship is still more or less the same in all of the administrations up until Biden. And even there, the relationship is the same. It's just that there's less ambition.
I'm sorry I missed the first hour, so if my question is something you've already addressed, you know, you can forget it. I'm interested in the follow-up to the question about comparing the Trump administration to the Biden administration, which you said Biden is mostly transactional, and Trump was ideological. It's hard for me to see that. I mean, are you saying that Biden isn't ideological, that he's just kind of putting his finger up and seeing which way the wind blows? I mean, because he's taken, you know, if you look at public opinion among people who are self-identifying Democrats, his policy isn't very popular anymore. So unless his only calculation is to keep on the good side of the heavy political donors. I mean, so if you could
I don't think it's transactional in the positive sense at all. I think he just sees that there's nothing to gain from engagement on Israel. I didn't think he was. I don't think I said he was transactional. I think I said that he has a policy.
I'm interpreting your position.
Yeah, no, not at all. I think he's actually probably very disappointed and frustrated with Israel, but just completely unwilling to do anything about it because A, he doesn't know what to do. There is no roadmap for this. And B, there's just only downside politically, both politically, but also as far as his other priorities. Like you just waste time and energy on something that he doesn't believe has any chance of succeeding. And so is sort of reverted to this policy of no conflict, which means pretty low engagement. We'll see how that converges, how all of that converges when it comes to Saudi Arabia and this fabled maybe deal that's maybe coming. But even that is sidestepping all the contentious issues. You know, he's not going to tell the Israelis end the occupation and we'll get you flights to Riyadh. Like nobody, that's not happening. So again, just to go ahead.
I'm just wondering if there's any foreign policy issue he's willing to take a lead on. I mean, I carefully read about his first campaign appearance. All he talked about was domestic issues. I looked for any reference to the Ukraine, I mean, which seems to be the main foreign policy initiative of his administration. That's already they're in for $115 billion to the Ukraine, but he won't campaign on it. So that's not because he doesn't know what to do. He knows exactly what to do, but he doesn't perceive that there's any political gain from it. So there's something ideological about it. It isn't just purely weighing, seeing if he can do something.
No, I think he's very ideological, way more than Trump, including on Israel. But his ideology is commitment to Israel.
Yeah, okay.
And therefore he's not willing to rock the boat unless he sees a path forward, light at the end of the tunnel, and there isn't any. So why would he get bogged down in it? And the exception will be if there's a situation he can't ignore. Right. Nobody wanted, I believe, I don't think anybody wanted the Ukraine situation, but once it happened, like they all jumped in and staked positions and threw in tons of money and weapons and wherever we are. That's not my specialty, and it's not consequential to what I'm trying to say. But the point is that it couldn't be ignored. And if Israel or Palestine, or Israel-Palestine, turns into something that can't be ignored, I think he'll engage, but I'm certainly not optimistic about how he'll engage.
Yeah, good point.
There's two hands, and I think I'm going to have to go after those two questions.
Okay, Yossi, why don't you do?
Okay. I think when we're talking about Biden and Democratic Party and issue of Israel and Palestine, I think what Biden is the most fear is that if he will take, let's assume he take that he's really frustrated with Netanyahu, he doesn't want to invite him. Okay, for Netanyahu, it's not a big deal. But let's assume he take completely approach in United Nations or even put some limited sanction, right? Talking about a wishful thinking. But let's assume he go this way, this will cause a civil war in the Democratic Party. And I think Biden aware about this. And he asked himself, it's really worth it while he need the entire Democratic Party for other domestic issues, especially. So I believe, because once in a while in the past, I did talk to some progressive Congress people, and they more or less told me this, that in order to get some coalition on their domestic issue, they don't want to go to a fight over Israel. Even they believe the Israeli government is completely pretty bad, and human rights, occupation, they oppose all this, but they feel that their priority first is to keep friends in a Democratic Party, and therefore they have to let go. And I feel for some reason at this point, I don't know what's happening in the mind of Biden, but they all know, especially on issue of Israel, that anytime you take a strong stand, immediately cause an enormous reaction, not only on the Republican side, even inside the Democratic Party. And maybe this is one of the reasons he said, I just not do anything because I can't afford a deep division in Democratic Party on this issue, because I need them all on my side on domestic issues. This is my understanding of American politics. You know, of course, the casualties is the people who live there, and they have to pay the price of this, what's happening here. You know, I watched the movie called The Boycott, which I got it from Haaretz paper about this. And there were progressive Democrat who voted for anti-BDS law, just let go, is not going to a confrontation. Then some of them regretted this, but it happened, you know, but he didn't want to go to a war with somebody over this. You know, this is, you know, I'm pessimistic for the next 20 years. I'm optimistic for the next 500 years.
Yeah, I mean,
some of the people here, you know, that I know if 500 years from now, which might we see a completely different world, including in the region of the Middle East, that include Israel, Palestine, and everybody else there. But I don't know in our lifetime. I just don't see any significant movement. But anyway, thank you so much. You know, whatever I heard from you, I appreciate very much, you know, and okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
Elliot, did you have something? Sorry.
Yeah, just real quickly, I know you have to go. Thanks again, Michael. Just following on the heels of what Yossi said, but also kind of concurring with you in part. I think, yeah, Biden is very ideological. I think he is a Zionist through and through. He's shown it for the longest time. And I think he's just saying, well, this is going to be, if history is an index of what's going to happen, this is going to be, as right-wing government as this is, it's going to be a short-lived administration. We can live with it. And we go on. I think he has a soft heart. Yeah, I think he has a soft heart for Jews. And I think that's the fiber of his Zionist being. I think it's more visceral than ideological for him, but to the degree that the visceral and ideological, it's hard to parse those out. He's one of those. I think he's just going to say, well, and again, we have the default thing because he's got to deal with Ukraine and other things, so he's got a lot of things on his plate. So probably a mixture of things in the last analysis.
Yeah, I mean, if there's any change, if there's any hope for him to do something, and it's, certainly not guaranteed to be good something, it's after the elections. If he has a second term and after he gets whatever domestic policy through or stuck, hopefully not only in his last week like we saw with Obama, but again, also that is not going to fundamentally change the relationship such that Israel will have to reconsider its values and interests and become a democracy.
Yeah. Bravo, Michael. Thank you.
You're muted, Jeff.
Thank you, Michael.
Jeff, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Michael. We appreciate it. I learned a lot. I think everybody learned a lot. Your viewpoints are quite interesting and profound. So we thank you very much, and I'll contact you about your honorarium in the next day or two.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Bye-bye.
Good evening. Bye.
You're bored.